Lord, we thank you for your wisdom and grace, your joy, your just everything that you do in us. Fill us with your Spirit tonight. We just ask you to give us great concentration. Help us to understand these things, the importance of your hand in history and what that means for us as people of God. We just ask you to lead us through these things tonight. In your name, amen. Okay, so like I said, tonight we're going to talk about, there are three, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Jews, really. These three, and then this, and of course from this, Jesus Christ comes, and then the church comes from this group of people and spreads out over all these people. So we're going to begin to talk about the life of the church and what it means here, and see how we arrived at it. These three groups of people, as far as Western civilization goes, these three groups of people form our primary foundation for Western civilization. From the Greeks, we get, you could say we get philosophy. If you watch a football game tonight, you can, Olympics. This comes from Olympics and athletics as competition. Comes from the Greeks, philosophy and government, art and government in one sense, or I should say government philosophy. Government and philosophy, and the philosophy of government. From the Romans, we would get administration. They were the first chief road builders. Administration was part of their deal. Public works projects, the Romans were part of that. Administration, military, and then social order is what they tried to define themselves on. And from here, we get law, ethics, and really, law, ethics, and the source of religion, for the most part, because the three major world religions, Jewish, Islam, and Christianity, all have their roots in Abraham and the Jews. So, let me get a picture up here for you. We'll start by talking about. We're going to go to Daniel. If you want to move to the book of Daniel. Okay, here's a chart. Can you see that? Okay, that's a little. I'll try to explain a little bit. There we go. There's a chart from Daniel. This is Daniel 2. Here, oops, sorry, a little bit too big for the internet audience. Oops, wrong thing. There you go. Okay, this is from Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. Now this story, you know this story, right? Why is Daniel in Babylon? Why is Daniel in Babylon? God has, pardon? Yeah, the exile. God has removed Israel from its land because they did not, one of the primary reasons mentioned in the Bible is because they did not let the land rest. They were removed from their land for abusing the land that God had given them. It was like a real green reason, one of the greenest reasons in the Bible. Israel was instructed to sow the land with single seed, not abuse it, not mix seed on it. They were supposed to till it for 5 years and eat from that year by year. In the 6th year, they got double. And that 6th year, that double that double amount of production from the land gave them the ability to give the land its rest, its Sabbath rest, a seventh year rest, a year rest for the fields, so that the fields could get, could replenish themselves. So God removed them to, into captivity to Babylon, and gave the land its rest. And in Babylon, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego became counselors to the king, Nebuchadnezzar. Now what happened is Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he forgot the dream. But he wanted to remember the dream. So he asked his wizards and his wise men and his sorcerers and all those who were his counselors. Among those counselors were Daniel and these other 3 Hebrew boys. And his thing was, you got to tell me the dream and the interpretation. And of course, the wizards and the other guys will give us the dream, and then we can tell you what it means. And Nebuchadnezzar said, no, you must tell me the dream and the interpretation. And so everyone, all the wise men were being rounded up to be killed. And Daniel said, what's the problem? What's the problem? And, well, the king needs to know what the dream was. And you got to tell him the dream and the dream and the interpretation. So Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys prayed, and God gave Daniel the interpretation. This is in chapter 2. And here it is. It says, the secret is revealed to Daniel in chapter 2, verse 20. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and seasons, and he removes kings and sets up kings, and he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. Verse 22, he knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. And he thanks God, and God reveals this dream to him. The great image, verse 31, O king, you saw a great image, and the great image whose brightness was excellent stood before thee, and the form was terrible, and the image head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms were of silver, his belly and his thighs were of brass, and his legs of iron, and his feet part of iron and part of clay. And you saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon the feet that were of iron and clay, and broke it to pieces. That then there was the iron, the clay, the brass, and the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away. No place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Okay, and Daniel said, this is a dream, and we will tell the king the interpretation. You are a king of kings. And this is the interpretation. The head of gold we see in this figure here. The head of gold. Daniel had 2 dreams, and both dreams are the same. The dream in Daniel 7 has animals in it, sort of animals, and it forecasts the kingdoms that are to come. Now, Babylon was the kingdom that was in place there with Babylon, with one king, Nebuchadnezzar. He's the head of gold. And the silver came next. This would be Darius's, and Artaxerxes' reign. The Medo-Persian empire came next, silver. It was a different kind of government in that. And then came Greece. Greece would follow that. Greece, Alexander the Great, Greece. And then the iron legs, because of their iron legs, would be the Roman Empire. And then out of the remnants of the Roman Empire, we have many empires, some of clay, some of iron. Clay means, clay is like, you can look at this way. The clay represents, we are made of the dust, we are made of the clay of the ground. So you could look at this as some of the governments that have ruled since the Roman Empire fell have been governments of men. They've been democracies, and most of the countries on the world are claimed to be democracies where the people vote and a representative government, and some are also, we do have tyrants. We still have tyrants in existence. So at some point, what it says is that a stone will come out of a great mountain and crush that. That speaks of Jesus Christ, and that's a way in the future forecast when Jesus Christ will rule all the nations and crush that. But we see here these three. The Babylonian Empire will end shortly after Nebuchadnezzar dies. His son will not worship the Lord, and that will end very quickly. That will end very quickly, and then the Medo-Persian will end. That's the lion. In Daniel chapter 7, it's the lion. The Babylonian Empire is defined as a lion. It's the king of all the beasts. And then the next one is the bear. The bear is not so elegant as a lion. That's the Medo-Persian Empire. Was not as elegant, was not as, it wasn't as together and royal as, say, like the Nebuchadnezzar Empire of Babylon. Then you have the leopard. The leopard really speaks of Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. Alexander the Great moved very fast. He was a lightning quick warrior, like a leopard, quick as a cat. And that empire moved very swiftly, and then when he died at 33, it separated itself. Now you see the next one there is like a monster. A monster is the next thing. This is like a many kind of things, and this is what Rome was, a collection of, power and democracy and art and culture. It became like a monster, and that's the best way to describe how human. When you get so many human governments together, you get a monster. It has teeth, it has fur, it has horns. Parts of it are dangerous, parts of it are cute and cuddly. Sort of like, the government today. Part of our government in the United States, cute and cuddly. Some of it has a lot of teeth. At tax time, they take a chunk out of your income. That's the teeth. So, and Daniel got these two dreams and forecast, a lot of what we will, forecast these empires that would come from these dreams when God gave him the interpretation. So the civilization that we're looking at right now, that we start with here tonight, is the Greek civilization. It started to develop we'll find it. It started to develop on the island, really, of Crete, this island here. These islands, you see many cities, there's palaces, and it's an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And the Minoan culture was there. It was a brilliant early civilization, and they've come to be known as the Minoans because the name of their king of this island was King Minos, M-I-N-O-S. They set up trading posts. They were in the middle of having an island culture. They traveled by boat and traded with the city-states that were scattered along the Greek and the Spanish and the African and the Middle Eastern, that whole area that eventually became the center of the Roman Empire, that whole area around the Mediterranean Sea. This culture was, was the beginning of it. Now, some of it, I'll show you something here. One of the things that was part of it was bulls. There's a drinking chalice there. You see, that keeps coming up for some reason. Bulls are worshipped. They're still worshipped in India. And as we saw last week, sacred cows in India, sacred cows in many parts of the world. The devil has his way, and he infects every culture similarly. He doesn't have a lot of new things under the sun. So this is a Minoan chalice that they found on the Isle of Crete, and this is something that they used there. So by about 1400 BC, this civilization began to disappear and was lost, and then it was taken over by the people of the land, which is in the southern Europe around Greece. Now, there's a time that comes in here. We have this Troy. You've probably heard of this, Troy and the Trojan War, and this is the Trojan War. many movies and many things have been written about this. But let's find this is what Greece looked like. This is the Aegean world at the time of the Trojan War. Let me close this in on this for you. Doesn't want to get it. There we go. Okay, so this is, this Crete is down below the thing here, but this is, every time I move the magic wand, it makes it bigger. Sorry. Okay, and this is the culture here. We see Troy up in the corner. You can see up here is Troy in this corner of the map, and that's where that was part of it. And down here is Athens. Athens is down in this lower part. You can see the name Athens, Sparta, and Delos. These islands are important for us to understand. They all had their own different kinds of governments going on at that time. And in the Troy was in that area it controlled the shipping lane up into the inside there, up through that area. That's now Turkey, Istanbul, the Hellespont up there. That goes up into the sea there, the Black Sea. So that is the area. They were a warrior kind of tribe, and they were told by Homer. Homer was I have a picture of him here. Homer was a blind poet. This is him. He liked to tell stories with his guitar, sort of like, Don Francisco from, if you know who that is, I don't know. He was one of the fathers of contemporary Christian music, okay? All right, you should go back and listen to his songs because they absolutely made sense and they all came from the Bible and they didn't say the same chorus 86 times. Oh, okay, sorry about that. That was just my commentary on today's music. But anyway, but this is Homer in the midst of his listeners there. And Homer was primarily he was a blind poet. And he composed these epic poems, Iliad and the Odyssey, and that's where much of the information for the Trojan era is found, the Trojan War. The Greeks, went up there to claim that area because it was like sort of a romantic cause to them. It was like they wanted to have, the Greeks were interested in culture. They had heard a lot of things. They had talked about a lot of things. They were, Paul, the Apostle Paul talks about them in Acts 17, I think it is, and he says the Athenians only like to sit around talking about some new things. These people had a lot of time on their hands, obviously. I mean, that meant one thing. The food supply obviously was consistent, and people could sit around and talk about, mathematics and philosophy and where we all came from, that kind of thing. And this, we really owe that kind of sophistry, that kind of philosophy, that kind of thinking without going anywhere to the Greeks. I mean, it does go somewhere, but I mean, it did. Now, the story of Troy. The story of Troy goes, here's this, there we go, right there. The story of Troy, that's the Trojan horse. The story of Troy is that the Greeks came up and surrounded it. They could not get into the city. They tried to get into the city, and then they did the Greeks thought about a little, sort of a misdirection play. Everyone left, and they left this horse, and inside the horse was several soldiers. The people brought the horse into the city, and soldiers came down from the inside of the horse and let all the other soldiers in, and they triumphed, and they burned down the city. The Greeks burned down the city, and this was considered a legend until a German archaeologist found the city of Troy. And so, like many things that are sometimes just not considered, they don't consider these things to be real. They really do become real at some point when the archaeologists discover them. Okay, the Greek civilization is not based on, let me get back to a map here. The Greek civilization was not based on the river culture that the other civilizations we've studied so far. You could see these are the primary city-states. There's Troy up in the corner there, and then these other ones, Sparta, Delos, Athens, Eretria, all these Thebes, Mount Olympus, and these places. They were really ruled by their own, their own local governments. They were all locally controlled, pretty much. This is what we get the word metropolis, because polis, this means, city-state. And this is what we get our word political from. Because the people who ruled the polis were the politicians. They were the leader of that. And then we get metropolis, which is larger cities. They become bigger cities. Metropolis, cities with, what do they call it? Cities with suburbs. Metropolis, a city would be called a city with suburbs. So each, the city was usually, like Athens, for instance, it was set up a certain way. Athens was set up with the Acropolis, which is on the hill. We'll see this. You've probably seen pictures of this. This is the Acropolis. This was the thing that sat on the hill there. That was the fortress, and that was also the temple of the gods sitting over the hill. So that's, the Greeks developed that, on the hilltop, the temples worshiping God, and on the flatter ground, lower ground, we have the agora, which is the market. This is a remnants of a market. Sort of looks like a mall, doesn't it? Okay. Maybe one of those malls that was torn down in West Baltimore or something. I don't know. But that's, just think of that as a mall. Maybe Golden Ring Mall was once there and it was torn down. Anyway, we're talking about Baltimore City a little bit. Sorry, it was on the DVD. Okay, so this is the remnants. This was where the marketplace was. The Acropolis stood above, and the marketplace was, where all the buying and selling and the trading was done. So the early governments developed from this idea, the businessmen and the thinkers. The early governments began that way. The forms of governments started really with, you can think of a single leader monarchy. We know this as sort of like a king, but the Greeks worked their way through this. The rule by one, the rule by one. The Greeks started. They went through this. Every city-state, every one of the city-states that we saw had their king, and that king was supreme. He sometimes had helpers that ruled with him, but this monarchy was the first thing, ruled by one. And then after that, also some cities were ruled by aristocrats, which was the rule by the best, for lack of a better word. I'm a thinker. You're not a thinker. You can't rule. So we will tell you what to do. So, this was like the thinkers and the temple people would be, this was the rule by the intelligent people. Do you ever feel like that? Like some of the politicians think you're just dumb as dirt? And that usually when people think they're dumb as dirt and you make them feel like dirt, usually they rebel. And that's a scary place to be. Oligarchy is the next one. Oligarchy. Sorry, let's erase that and get it right. Ollie, not like who was that? Not like Laurel and Hardy. Ollie, not like an oligarchy. Oligarchy. This was the rule by the rich. The few rich would own this. And, all of the city-states in Greece went through this kind of progression of governments, and the philosophers were thinking about this, like how can we better help the people. The aristocrats were trying to figure out a better form of government, and some did develop, actually. But you'll see how they get sort of out of hand. The next one was tyranny. This is a rule by a powerful person by force. One-man rule. We're back to one-man rule, but it was like very forceful. Monarchy, I think they would say it was like a benevolent dictatorship. Like he was kind. That's how, there were kind kings in the Greek city-states. But in the tyranny, it had one-man rule, and he would usually use force, or he would assemble a group of people around him and, and move. We have some tyrannies going on in the world today. Venezuela would be one that you could claim that one man has changed the whole constitution with a group of men around him. That's what's happened there, and he would like to raise up a socialist kind of organization and a socialist kind of empire in that part of the world, if you read about it. And he idolizes the old Russian communists, and he idolizes Fidel Castro from Cuba. So that's part of, but that's another part of history. You'll talk about that in the spring. But in this part of history, tyranny was not, and then came democracy. Democracy, which we understand as, the rule by the many. The rule by the many. And primarily the cycles of oligarchy, tyranny, and democracy were the things that kept, the circle that went through the Greeks. There would be a rule by the few rich. There would be one of those rich persons who decided to be, I am going to lead rich men. I am going to be leading. I'm the one who knows what he's doing. And then they would respond by creating a democracy at some point. Now, back to our map of, excuse me, back to our map of Greece here. Now, Sparta was a different kind of place. Okay, Sparta, just to give you an idea, Sparta was they were a total military culture. I don't know if you ever heard this word Spartan. If you're Spartan, it's a total military culture. That everyone, if you were found to be weak as a child, if you were found to be weak as a child, if you were found to be weak as a child, you were left for dead. At age 7, boys began military training. They were looking for soldiers. They would conquer people. Everyone that was a Spartan was a soldier. Every Spartan was a soldier. They start training them. If you were a woman, your sole duty as a Spartan woman was to produce soldiers. So you also had to exercise so that you would be healthy and happy and strong, and then you would deliver strong, healthy men who would help the Spartans defend their territory. So there's the thing about this culture is they leave nothing behind except this sort of legacy of militarism and everything, because they really didn't do anything. They didn't sit around thinking about philosophy. They didn't invent anything. They would capture people, and those people they captured would become their slaves. Those slaves, those prisoners of war, would farm their fields. They would teach their children. They would live in the houses. And all of the resident Spartans would become, generals and soldiers and baby bearers. And that's, that was a military state that existed there. One thing is that it's kind of interesting that in all of these Greek city-states, only in Sparta did the women really have property rights, which is kind of interesting. Like, you'd think that this is like a total male all the alpha males dominate the society, and you'd think that women would be, okay, you're going to make babies for me, that's all you're going to do, I'll keep you barefoot and pregnant, that's your life for me. But they had property rights. In no other city-state in Greece at this time did they have the kind of property rights there. So it's kind of interesting that it's just one little interesting thing that were there. And And they also had a hand in running the estates. So, meanwhile, in Athens, Athens was really becoming the model of democracy. The wealth and power grew. I mean, Athens was becoming one of the great, it was becoming, I guess you would call it, it was the New York City of its day. It was the center of culture, for the world. I think we could say that. I mean, I think we could say that right now. If someone said, what is the capital of the world? I think people would say it's New York City. The United Nations is there, and it's the center of, it doesn't, but Athens had become this way at this point in time. And there was a demand, the farmers, basically two kinds of people, nobles and priests, and everyone else. And everyone else wanted to have some sort of, hand in the government. So they were crying for, like we did here in America, taxation without representation, threw tea into the harbor and those kind of things in Boston Harbor. That's American history. But the nobles, and then there was the merchants and the farmers. The merchants and the farmers, they were bringing a lot of wealth into Athens, and Athens was exporting food and everything. And these people, this group of people, they decided they wanted a hand in how the government would work. So there was a man named Solon, S-L-O-N, and he instituted, he became a leader of the common people. One of the primary problems here for this was debt slavery. Debt slavery, which was part of the, which, like, if you were in debt, you went into slavery, and because you could be a slave for who knows how long. He outlawed this idea of debt slavery and instituted these economic reforms, and but still, really, the wealthy landowners were really the only ones that could hold the positions of power. They had limited rights. They could participate in government a little bit. The men could. The women did not in Athens. But some changes were made. Some changes were made to bring their conditions up to a better level for everyone in the city. Let's see. So we move on. There was a man. Let's see. There was a man who was part of this is Pericles. You spell this. This is a statue of him in Athens. Pericles. Pericles. He was one of the leaders. He was one of the first to help institute the direct democracy. He was an aristocrat from 461 BC to 429, but he instituted a type of democracy that was, unheard of, really. Unheard of. Really, 6,000 people, as many as 6,000 people could participate in these representative assemblies that he instituted, during his time. The citizens would not elect a person to go to a Congress. It would be every citizen would meet in a great stadium and they'd have a great vote on things. And so, he was very popular for as long as he was leading. He died in a plague when the Spartans decided that they wanted to take over Athens. The Spartans at a certain point decided that Athens had become too big of a place and it was looked at as a conquest. So there's a number of wars that started beginning to happen in the Greek area. Persia, which controlled pretty much all the way over to this area just by Troy. Persia was wanting taxes and gold from Athens, and they were having trouble extracting that. So there were several wars that were fought in this area on the seas. And what happened was the Greeks wound up winning those wars. The Athenians, their way of fighting on the sea, managed to defeat the Persians, and they managed to force the Persians back into their territory. So the war between Sparta and Athens is known as this little area is called Peloponnesos. It's called the Peloponnesian War, and Greece was split in two, and there was a 30-year conflict that went on during that time. They had managed to come together and push back the Persians, and then they split in two to fight over each other. Sparta, after Pericles died of a plague that he caught running from Athens into the countryside. If you can imagine this happening, one of the military things that Pericles asked the Athenians to do was to move to the countryside. So when the Spartans marched on Athens, they burned it to the ground, but there was no people there. Just one problem is that Pericles, their great leader, got some sort of, I think it was malaria or something. Anyway, he died from being in the countryside. So, that's why I don't go to the countryside. No, that's why I'm a city boy. No, anyway, swine flu will find you, I guess, somewhere. They burned the city, and the Spartans did control this area for a short season, for about maybe about 20 years. They controlled from 421 BC to 404 BC, or maybe 404 BC to 370 BC. Sparta had some control over this area, maybe 40, 50 years when they were in control, based on this invasion there and the loss of their leader. The Persian attacks, the Persian attacks kept coming after the Greeks, after this war was settled. Macedonia, which is up in this area above Greece, Macedonia, Philip and Alexander were alive, and this was going to be the rise of the next great. They loved Greek culture, but they wanted to control everything. And, in this area, the Greeks still claim Macedonia as part of their empire, even though it's a separate state at this time. Macedonia is actually its own country at this time. During this time, there is the development of the philosophers, Socrates. You've heard of Socrates, right? Socrates. You've heard of Socrates. We have this. Socrates would ask people about questions. He was put on trial when he was about 70, and he was accused of failing to respect the gods of Greece. The Greek had many gods, which is kind of interesting. They had many gods. The gods were pretty much, you've seen them maybe. Hercules, right? Hercules is one. You've heard of that. Zeus, Hercules. Hera, these are gods. It's kind of interesting. If you think about it, when Adam and Eve fell, what did God guard the way to? What was that tree? There was a tree they ate of, then they fell, and then they had to guard. Two angels guarded the way to what tree? Tree of life, okay? I think if you understand why God did that, because if you look at what the Greek gods were like, they were immortal, okay? They could never die, but they were very flawed, and they were full of lusts. And so I think if you read like Greek mythology, I don't recommend it. If you've read it in the past and you've wondered why it was all just junk, you can sort of relate to it like, why did God guard the way to the tree of life? I think the Greek gods would have been the result, because people would have been immortal, but they would have been, still with their lusts and their frailties. So the tree of life was guarded after the fall for that reason, so that man did not become immortal in that case, apart from the way he was supposed to be immortal, which was not sinning in the garden. So if you look at the Greek gods, the Zeus, Hercules, Atlas. Atlas is he carries the world on his shoulders, right? And he looked at the Medusa's head, the snake lady, and right? You know all this? Is this all coming back to you? It's all coming back to me. It's scary. have strange dreams about it. But Atlas, was doomed to carry the world on his shoulders, and then he asked someone to kill Medusa and hold up her snake head so that he would turn into stone. So now he turns into stone. So you see, these flawed kind of people who had all kinds of appetites and lusts, but were immortal. That's the Greek gods. Okay, now Socrates was a sophist. He was a thinker. He was, developed skill in rhetoric. He would interrogation is his great invention. Interrogation. He asks you questions designed to turn the question on you. It's called the Socratic method. I'll ask you a question, and then I'll use your answer to bite you. And so that's what's with us, if you're wondering what's with us from Socrates. He didn't write anything, but he had a student named Plato, not Play-Doh, but Plato. If this were we've lost power. I think so. So we've lost power. But Plato was the philosopher that. Let's see if I can get it to work again here. Okay, there you go. So Plato, I have a picture of Plato, and this is a painting of Plato and Aristotle. These are the next two. Plato wrote Plato's Republic, which is really talks about his belief system was the importance of reason. He divided society into three classes of people. There were your workers, there were your philosophers, and there were your soldiers. And the philosophers were supposed to rule the state. The workers would provide your necessities, and the soldiers would defend you. And that was Plato's Republic. And he believed that men were superior to women, but some women were superior to men. So he was like ahead of his time, maybe. Plato's student was Aristotle, and Aristotle's important for us because he wrote Nicomachean Ethics, which is, ethical treatment of people, and he was also a teacher of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great studied under him, and Alexander the Great is the son of Philip the Macedonian. And so this is the leopard. If we go back to the picture from Daniel, this is the leopard. Philip is the leopard. Philip, and then Philip, this leopard. Greece is the fast-moving, and the horn here, the horn that's just charging, the goat with the horn that just charges in. And the thing that Alexander the Great developed was a way of warfare known as the phalanx, which is like, if you see this, they would maybe you've seen it in some of the movies that they've done on this, is they would, the soldiers would form one wedge and charge across the battlefield. They made, the battles that they came to be fought with iron weapons and swords and military tactics that resulted in a lot more death than they did in the past. Alexander's empire stretched from this part all the way over to India. And he rose to the throne, the control of it, about age 21 after his father Philip died. And he planted many cities around. There's many Alexandrias around. The one that still remains with us today is Alexandria, which is like right here on the coast of Egypt. That is important for us because that's where the Septuagint was written, which is an amazing story when they put 72 scholars in different rooms to translate the Torah, the Old Testament, the books of Moses, into Greek from Hebrew. And the amazing thing is that the miracle that they tell in the Talmud is that every man came out with the exact same translation. So I don't know if that's legend. That is legend, but that is what they say happened with the Septuagint. 70 scholars in Alexandria, which had a large Jewish population living there, and it had a large library a large library. That is really, Alexander would be maybe our first philosopher king. We could call him our first philosopher king. He was, he was schooled. He listened to what Aristotle had to say about philosophy, and his real interest was that we have the best thing going. We are Greeks. We are Macedonians. The Greek culture is the greatest thing going. Democracy, philosophy, art, culture, all these things need to be spread throughout all of the world. And so he was working his way, bringing everything, bringing the Greek culture with him wherever he went. Now, this is important for us to understand because this language, this Greek language, was very easy to learn, and it became the language of discussion and the language of education. And the reason this language is important is because this would be the language that Paul would use. This would be the language that the Apostle Paul would use in writing his letters and in the spread of the gospel. So these things are going to start happening. Philip's spread of the empire, the spread of the Greek culture, the spread of the Greek language. This is number one. This is like really the first foundation of the preparation for the ministry of Jesus Christ and then the birth of the church. This is number one. Alexander's fast and furious charge across India, the legend is that he was so disappointed that his soldiers didn't want to fight anymore that he drank himself to death. Some people say he was poisoned by his soldiers. They were tired of fighting. They had fought across this, this terrain is not the easiest terrain to fight on, but they control this vast territory at this time. And, there was a name for it, Hellenism, which is, Hellenism. This is the Greek culture, and this is what Alexander the Great was really, that was his world mission. He had a world mission. I'm going to bring the Greek culture everywhere that I go, and people are going to like it. And if they don't like it, then they're going to die. Basically, that's the way it is, But the one thing that he did do, which is kind of interesting, he allowed the different religions that were in the area, he would not try to destroy that. He thought that these people, now remember, Greeks thought of everyone who was not a Greek as what? A barbarian. If you are not Greek, you are a barbarian. So every place they went, they were looked at as poor barbarians. Oh, you worship the Hebrew God, that's okay. You're just a barbarian. We'll just let you have your temple and your sacrifices. And the same thing in the other cultures that were in there. He allowed the cultures and the gods in the territories that he took over to exist. Peaceful coexistence. He thought that if religion, this was something that Karl Marx would say later on, religion is the opiate of the masses. That's what he would say. Communism's design was to get rid of religion because it just really keeps people, sleepy and happy. And Alexander saw that and said, it's okay for people to be sleepy and happy. They can worship their gods as long as they don't make trouble for my empire. That'll be fine. And so so he was really, I guess you could say, I don't know if he was atheist or agnostic. He did honor the Greek gods, but he didn't call on them for power. Like, remember, he's from Socrates, and Plato and Aristotle had already really started to expose, had already started the humanist kind of movement to put man at the center and not worry about things that were superhuman and immortal. We will make the world right. We are men, we will make the world right. So, Alexander the Great really wasn't interested in, he figured barbarians eventually, once they got a little philosophy in them, once they saw a great Greek tragedy or two, they would be fine, So, he was a mighty conqueror. That was, that spread of Greek culture really was important. And then we can't diminish the importance of that, the Septuagint, that writing of the Old Testament into the Greek language, because that spread that spread the reading of the books of Moses all throughout Alexander's territory also. So that, that kind of thing was just, these things are coming together, because if all these people are reading the Greek translation of the New Old Testament, when Jesus Christ arrives, people who were readers and understanding that would match up the prophecies that he would fulfill in that time. Okay, so the things that we have left, maybe, from, this is a picture here of Alexander himself. That's him on the horse there. Pretty violent kind of guy. But that's, that's a sculpture of him there and leading his warriors. That's one thing. The things that that's the Trojan thing. What did the Greeks leave behind? Okay, this is a boxing match. Old boxing match in the Olympics. You can see that, right? He's about to do a WWF move, pull the guy's beard there like that, But that's the Olympics. That's what we have left, the Olympics, and and this is the amphitheaters that were still all scattered all over, Alexander's empire. These amphitheaters, let's put plays on for them. Let's show them the tragedies. Tragedies or comedies. Primarily, the tragedies were they told of human suffering. Stoic philosophy was becoming, popular at that time. Stoic philosophy means that life gives you lemons and you just have to suck it up. That's basically it. If you want to just put it in a nutshell, I'll put it in there to mix my metaphors since I used fruit and nuts. But I mean, we're saying really life just gives you lemons. If you're a Stoic, you just sort of suck it up and live. And that was one school of philosophy. There was the Epicurean philosophy too. Epicurus said, let's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. These are your hedonists, giving themselves to bodily pleasures again and again and again. And, so you had the Stoics who were like, we just have to get through life. We just have to get through life, whatever it gives us. And then you had the Epicureans, we just have to just be wanton and, just do whatever we want to do. Tailgate until we drop, that kind of thing. So the last thing that we'll talk about here is at the end of when Alexander died, it left a power vacuum, and this power vacuum is important for us to understand. There is 4 major generals. So we have Ptolemy, Seleucus, and then there was 2 others, but these 2, because they deal. Okay, Egypt. He was primarily the Egyptian part of the empire. And then this Seleucus was Syrian and Mesopotamia. These 2, this is where these 2 dynasties that would rise up from the ashes that was Alexander's empire, these 2 dynasties were the hammer and the anvil, they're called. Hammer and anvil. And between these 2 would be Israel. And there will be many wars that would be fought for this little strip of land called Israel. Israel became an important land in this falling apart after Alexander's empire crumbled. After Alexander died, it split into 4 parts, which is what Daniel forecast in his prophecy also, that the he-goat that would charge across his empire would fall, and it would be split into 4. And that's what happens here, these 4. And eventually this would pave the way for the Romans, with their efficiency and their administration, to take over this whole territory. Okay, so we'll take a break till, we'll give you about 10 minutes. Come back a little bit after, quarter after, and then we'll start talking about the Romans. Okay? All right.